Hey everyone, thanks for joining. That music you hear is used by our next guest, Clint Weldon of Night Shift. Clint interviewed two of our moderators, Remsey, our founder, and Pixar It Didn't Happen, a co-founder. We decided we wanted to know more about Clint, so we invited him on to see how he got into the UFO subject. You can find Clint at his photography website at clintweldon.com. You can find his YouTube channel by typing in Clint Weldon. Or you can join his team, Team Night Shift, at teamnightshift.com. So without further ado, let's say hi to Clint.
Hey Clint, how you doing?
I'm doing well.
Great to
living
see
the dream.
You are living the dream, man. You have a great show. We love to see your stuff. Our Reddit sub enjoys your stuff as well. We definitely are happy to have you post your information and your shows on our sub.
Oh, well, thanks. I'm happy to be there. UFOB is like my home away from home. That's where I kind of start my day and end my day.
Well, that's wonderful to hear, and we thank you for that. We appreciate it. We do our best to make sure that everybody gets what they want with the information on the phenomenon, because it's all over the place. It's crazy, and we all just have to make sense of it. So,
that's fact.
So tell us about you. This is what we're here for, Clint. You interviewed Rem not too long ago, and you interviewed Clint, or Pixar It Didn't Happen not too long ago. So we wanted to say hello to you and learn more about you. How did you get into this?
I think I got into it probably the way a lot of people got into it during the lockdowns, as things were getting kind of boring, and the UFO world was sort of turning upside down after the 2017 TTSA stuff and the Leslie Kean articles and Lou Elizondo and David Grush. As all of that was sort of happening, I was kind of in between careers, and I had a little extra time on my hands, and I was trying to talk to everybody I knew about it. And so when David Grush did that interview with Ross Coulthard on News Nation, and it dropped, I'm like texting everybody. I'm like, have you seen this? My friends from high school, and people from college. I'm just trying to like get somebody who's interested. It was like crickets. And my wife entertained it for a while, but after a little while, she was like, okay, So I thought, okay, I need to do something. I have to talk to somebody. I'm just going to start a YouTube channel and just do it. So I started doing it, and it took off. So I kept with it, and that's how Night Shift was born.
It's funny too, because I was going to say, I mean, I know that my family's still kind of like, oh yeah, UFOs again, huh?
I try to work it in everywhere, but people, not everybody's as into it as we are, for sure.
It is tough. And then what is it like for you around friends and family now that you have Team Night Shift going on, and the website looks great, by the way. And,
thanks.
And again, your show, you've got a few dozen episodes. How many episodes do you have now?
Oh, we're up to like 60, I think 65 or 66.
Several dozens.
Yeah, it's getting up there. I'm finally finding that groove to create content on a more regular basis. So it should pick up from here too. It's been kind of slow the last couple months.
Oh, good for you. And it's looking great. It's very interesting. But again, so back to family and friends, are they do you talk to them about the phenomenon as much, or do you still have to kind of like bring it up when it comes up at the right time? What is it for you?
I do talk. What's funny is, like, I think the more that the conversation becomes normalized, but the more they just hear it on the news and people kind of referring back to it, it's sort of, I think we've kind of passed I don't know, there was like a weirdness barrier that we got through. I think somewhere probably when Joe Rogan started really focusing on this, and millions and millions and millions of people were seeing these interviews. Yeah. And I think now it's a little bit easier to have conversations with folks. My parents are like way more into it now that I'm doing this. So they really like to talk about it. My wife is a big Stargate fan. So her favorite thing to do is I tell her a story about something that happened in the news, and she's like, oh yeah, they did that on Stargate like 30 years ago. So
drip disclosure, right?
Drip disclosure. So it's getting easier, I think. Yeah. It's funny because the more people you talk to, and I'm sure you've run into this also, you start to talk to people, And maybe at first they're a little hesitant to get into it, but then they'll go, like it's happened with my mom. She'll go like, well, I had an experience once. And then she'll tell me this crazy story. I'm like, how come you never told me that? I didn't really think about it. And then I tell other people and they'll be like, oh yeah, I had a weird experience, or this happened to me, or, I think more people have had anomalous experiences than would normally admit it. I think it's just a bigger number. And once you start getting into it, people warm up to that a little bit once they can kind of link it to their own life in some way.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with you on that. Unfortunately, I feel like I still don't find the right moment or whatever for it to come up. And sometimes when I bring it up, it is a slight head cock. but yeah, it's nice that we're able to talk about it a little bit more. But I'm still finding that it's mainly here.
I think there's like one type of person is like, okay, now what? Like, great, I believe you, and then the question is, well, what next? Do we go to work tomorrow, or do we, are we gonna like change things? And I think that's where most people kind of are. I also think that, particularly in the last 5-6 years, a lot of people are just struggling, and they're just trying to get by and trying to get through the week, and things are a little tougher than they used to be, and so the bandwidth isn't really there. Even if it were true, and it did all turn out to be true, like, how does it impact me in my daily life? And I get it. I can see why some people would, where do you put that?
I agree. You're absolutely on it, because I know in the Discord and on the Reddit, I will always say people are just too busy. Unless an alien is going to affect the economy or affect their lives directly, it's just always going to be pushed back and pushed out there as just some silly hobby, I don't know, of their own, because because we still can't touch it. We still can't see them. We can only talk about this stuff. The evidence is, everything is still speculation. So when I'm talking to people about it, often is well, what evidence is there? Well, there's tons of testimonials from military witnesses. There's tons of testimonials from civilians, but that's all we have, are testimony, and we don't have that evidence that we can touch and feel and see.
I think we're getting closer to it, though. Don't you guys think that?
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. I'm sorry. I do want Adam and Rem to definitely jump in on this one. But again, Rem works hard and tirelessly to get information from the internet to our YouTube channel, so people can show other people there's evidence, there are testimonials, and we're getting close. We are getting closer to that, especially with whistleblowers. Rem, what do you think? And then Adam.
Yeah, well, recently I was looking at the Stoicism. You know that? As a philosophy. Mm-hmm. And it's when you apply that to the UFO subject, you have to stay focused on evidence, And I was thinking, like, okay, if you focus on evidence, what is evidence? And I was thinking, like, okay, why don't we check known UFO landing sites for magnetic anomalies, for instance? Radiation. Nobody does it. Radiation, yes. But other things like the implants. There was a period in which Dr. Lear operated people and pulled out implants. Okay. They sent it to scientific institutes, and it was investigated, and they discovered certain metals, which was odd because they were from space. So, that's interesting, and that could be evidence, but where is it?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, what happened to all of those implants?
Yeah, what happened to it? Exactly. And that's fascinating.
Gary Nolan needs those. We could get those to Gary.
Yeah, exactly.
Get them into a...
And I'm not saying that these implants are real or that they are extraterrestrial or something, but at least study them and come to that conclusion. But it never happens in a proper way. And now Dr. Lear isn't among us anymore. And so, but other things, like Another evidence is like what Christopher Sharp does, looking at what's the government doing and things they are saying, or etc., etc. And like the FOIA document recently that was discovered about the Five Eyes meeting.
Mhm.
So we have to focus on the evidence, and all the things around it exists, and it's also important, but it doesn't bring the subject further. The only thing that brings it further is evidence in terms of society and science. That's what I want to say.
I think there's a lot. There's many. I think there's many factors to consider. So one big point that I always like to talk about when talking about anything NHI related is that this is a historic phenomenon. It's not just the last 70 or 80 years. There's documentation. There's evidence of very odd crafts, very odd, I guess you could say, consciousness phenomena that's consistent throughout all human history, across all cultures, all continents. I really recommend anybody just looking into shamanism and various shamanic practices, like across the globe, because they're these types of like individuals, or the archetype of a shaman is there's different names depending on the time and culture, but essentially there always has been some type of figure that is prone to anomalous consciousness phenomena. But I think that's directly related. But just to narrow down on the question a little bit. So let's take the last, let's take the last 100 years. So 1920 to now. We do want the physical evidence, right? We want to see the crafts. We want to see this. We want to see that. But even within the last, say, 100 years, right? And really boiling down to like the 40s, when things really started, I guess you could say, heating up in the terms of the public eye. Who knows how long this has really been happening, behind the scenes in governments and militaries. Who knows how far it goes. I don't like to call it a rabbit hole. It's more of an ant farm, because it's way, way deeper than a rabbit hole, and way, way more sophisticated than going down a rabbit hole. But just taking the last, 180 years, there's been a lot of change in the types of crafts that witnesses have seen, just to isolate like military personnel, or even just a common civilian. We're not really necessarily seeing these saucers anymore. But what was everybody seeing in the 40s, maybe, to the 60s or even 70s, a lot of saucers, a lot of these saucer shapes. Now, there's all this tic tac shape that is seeing a lot, and these odd, these very odd looking drones or something. So, something we've seen footage of that from like that video that Corbell released, which, may or may not be an actual craft, or it's just an odd craft that was filmed by the military. But there's been a lot of change over time, and I really want to question, why has there been so much change over time? It really hasn't been, 70, 80 years is a lot for a human, but when you're talking about a type of civilization or species that can live, hundreds, thousands of years, that's not much time at all. And I really do believe time is a huge factor in the physics of encounters and consciousness and things like that. So it's, what do we want to, and really kind of what Rem was saying, what do we want to classify, as evidence? Do you want to classify, 2,000 person survey as evidence about their experiences, things like that, which, in terms of psychology, that is evidence. If you do the correct, analyses and things like that, that is evidence. That's how you build, understanding of psychological phenomena. But, we're humans, we're, materialism is important. We're all here in bodies in a physical world, and in a sense where, we want to see the craft. We want to see these, advanced technologies with our own eyes. Are we going to see them in the future? Yes, but I would say yes, but I would bring a lot of caution with this yes, because this has been happening for decades. And if that information does come out, it's going to be very controlled, and it's going to be specifically catered for a narrative, whatever that may be. I don't know, but the military knows about these crafts. No secret there. Some
Working with them.
yeah, that's the scary part. But I've said it before, I haven't said it in a while, but to me, the best way to approach evidence, I think, would be to let's look into the physics and see what we can do regarding magnetism and things like that, because I think it's more likely to find a new, I don't want to say new, I'll just use a new pathway of physics to start showcasing some of these anti-gravity things, all these very interesting technologies and potentials Nikola Tesla was talking about, 100+ years ago, that now we're seeing, in our waking day. We're literally seeing it, and the guy was, not silent when he said, "I'm not inventing for now, I'm inventing for the future." Dude knew what he was talking about. So we're in the future now. So there will be things that I think we're starting to be evidence, but I don't know how far it's going to go, because we're already starting to see a really big narrative shift in the last 7 years about UFOs really being brought forth from said government, which had never happened before. And my father has been, into ufology since pretty much like the 50s, the space race and things like that. And we were talking about it before, and I said, has the government ever really came out with those statements they've had, the last, collective 4 or 5 years, saying, we actually don't know what these things are. They've never said that before. There's a reason why they're saying that. There's a reason why they're changing the name to, UAP. It's all psychological. The way I see it, it's all psychological to start conditioning, younger minds to be like, this is normal. It's, oh no, not UFOs. No, they're UAPs. It can be, it's that's very different than a UFO. A UFO is what they, those crafts, whatever they were flying in World War II, the Foo Fighters, but I just see that like psychological push, and all, from the military government. So long-winded answer, but I do believe we will be seeing like evidence, because we're already starting to see it. It's just not what we want. And we want to see, that UFO, we want to see the extraterrestrial, like, right there, of course, the classic cliche, right in the White House lawn. But I don't think something like that's going to happen.
What do you guys think?
It totally could, but I don't think it will.
What do you guys think the minimum standard, like a Turing test for UAPs? Like, what's this minimum standard of evidence that you would need for you to just be like, all right, we're done here. Like, we can all go home. We know this is a settled conversation.
Well, I'll just say something similar to like we were talking about Ray Hernandez before we started, and other experiencers. One where it's I believe that'd be a close encounters of the first kind, where it's within 300, 400 feet. You can actually see it and it's moving around. But for me, since I started in on the UFO subject through the secret space program, I kind of feel like about maybe 50% or less or more could be, I'm all over the place. Could be our military, because again, there's the Mark McCandlish story where his friend went in and saw the 3 craft in the hangar. So that tells me that was in the 1980s. So, and
he said they look kind of old. Remember that? Yeah. He said they look kind of like they'd been beat up and run a lot.
Yes. So there's Mark McCandlish saying that, and that was in the 80s, and they looked old. He said it looked like it had, they were dirty. One of them had a small arm that would come out so they could do samples, probably from the moon, who knows. But that has always made me feel that the military has had anti-gravity since the 54, I believe it. I think Stephen Greer had a number. It was like October of 1954. So I'll just go with that and then say they finally were able to make a drone of some sort by 60s, maybe 70s. And then I've always said, and by the 70s, or maybe even before Apollo got to the moon, they had a base up on the moon.
I'm 100% convinced. Absolutely. Yeah, there's shit on the moon.
Convinced too. I'm very convinced that there's definitely a base on the moon. And I'm sure I've seen a couple people say, well, where is it? Well, why would they be on the top of the moon surface? It's underneath. Everything's always underground, just like it is here. I mean, we have deep underground military bases here, DUMBs. We all know about that. And yeah, so I believe that a lot of the sightings are military. So if I saw something, it'd still be tough to to say that's a UFO, and it could be from a non-human intelligence. But I'd still be like, well, I don't know. Like Greer always says, and again, I know a lot of people hate Greer. It's not like I'm a follower, but I mean, he laid the foundation for the disclosure. For disclosure, for the most part, he was one of the main workers laying the foundation. But as Greer said, in the early days, the craft that the military were making had rivets and seams. But you know that when you see a UFO, it's usually seamless, a perfect style craft. And if it's not a craft, it's an orb, or it looks just like a ball of energy. So, and there's different ways, but I guess I would have to just be able to actually see the extraterrestrial or the being come out and go, okay, that's not military. But I do see a military guy in uniform behind you up there. What's up with that? You know, so because I'm convinced as well that the military's been working with them. I mean, we've had several interviews. One of the people we interviewed, Sam, her whole family, 6 people were abducted at the same time. But one of the things she remembers about it was that she didn't feel like she was on a craft. She felt like she was in a base. Mm-hmm. And so that I think in John Mack's book, one of them had said that she felt like she was on a base on the moon, but it may not have been Mack's book. But anyways, that's the type of evidence I would want, is to actually see a being come out of a craft, almost landing in front of my house, coming out and greeting me, and okay, so here they are, but that's almost what I would need for that. How about yourself?
I what I would love to see is I want to see the Independence Day gigantic UFO hovering over New York City. I think that would be
a mass showing. But that's kind of what I was going to say when Adam was going to, we're probably never going to see the landing in front of the White House, but hey, how about a mass showing? Mm-hmm. I remember reading something where I want to say it was the raw material, but yeah, I saw that in your Dan Burisch. Yeah, I saw that in your Dan Burisch interview, but I forgot which material it was. But they said that if we were to show ourselves, there would be just as many of us as stars in the sky. So it's just to, I don't know. It's kind of what I think the world would need to see, is a mass showing to say, maybe they take over the airwaves like that British thing back in the 50s and say, people of Earth, blah, blah, blah. But that's probably never going to happen. I don't know. Like in your Dan Burisch React video where he said that there was a T9 treaty. I'd never heard of that. Rem, have you ever heard of the T9 treaty?
No.
A treaty, yeah. And I'm guessing, you could only guess that would be something after Eisenhower met with him in 41 or whatever it was. But
that's what he said. He claimed, well, in the not Mark Gamlish,
Dan Burisch?
Michael Schratt. Follow up
yeah.
to that. He says the T9 treaty, the Tau 9 treaty, was the one that, it was Eisenhower. The one, okay. And supposedly that was the same meeting at was it Holloman Air Force Base, where they supposedly have that 10-second clip of the craft coming in.
Yeah.
Have you seen that, where it's coming? Yeah. Supposedly that's the one. I don't know. What do you guys make of the Dan Burisch story from what you've seen? Because I have a really hard time with this. I'm looking at it and I'm like, this guy, he believes he's telling the truth.
I will once again go before Rem and Adam, but I threw that interview into our experiencer group, and our experiencers were looking at it, and they're like, I think he's legit. Just like you were saying, like, yeah. But they were like, oh, my grays didn't look like that. So maybe it's a different gray because my grays are like this. And they were comparing his descriptions of what they were saying, especially when it came to getting in or connecting to the craft by having the capillaries that would open up, and they believe that's how, because they were like, well, when I connected with the craft, it was just touching it. So they had their different experiences. But I thought that was really, really interesting, and I believe he was legit, and he was telling the truth. His body language was definitely that. Go ahead, start with Rem if you've seen the Dan Burisch interview.
No, I haven't seen it.
Okay, we'll
watch it.
We'll throw a link in there. Yeah, we'll throw a link in there for you. But did you see it, Adam?
I remember seeing it in the group chat.
Okay. Yeah.
But I think what I can add to that, this part of the discussion really, that there's so much variance between experiences with different types of craft.
True.
Various species, and I feel like we have our own cultural window, like the last 80 years or so, where people started drawing things, writing it down, but historically I think individuals were writing things and drawing it down. If they weren't writing it down, they were talking about it. But altogether, I think time is the biggest factor, where you're seeing all these some just totally bizarre, but there are similar themes with NHI, like the Greys or something. Like, oh, the experience I had with the Greys, they looked more human-like, or this Grey had a robotic voice, or this one actually looked feminine. These are just some things I've heard myself. Is there one just species of Grey, or is there one race of Grey? Should we even be using those terms to describe it? Especially if you have a species that unlocks time, and whatever way or shape or form that is, might be very interesting if you want to travel through time to influence a civilization or take a resource, or it could be you speculate all you want. But altogether, to me, the more I've really kind of just lived and researched and experienced the phenomenon, the less I want like a massive disclosure specifically from the government or military, but I want more of actual subjective disclosure, where any craft that an intelligent person analyze, and they say, well, like that's something that couldn't be, that's not something that's traditional here, that's not a phenomenon that humans could make. They went through the observables and things like that, and they've really contemplated on this, like, that's something, and it really influences their lives for a change. To me, that's, evidence to me. If you have an experience or really get super involved in ufology or something like that, and usually it branches out into like consciousness phenomena, like happened to me, myself, Ray Hernandez, it happens to a lot of people. To me, that's like the disclosure, because to me, that's understanding a bigger picture of reality, where it's not just humans here on this planet, which it feels like it's so mundane, but that's only because humans have really made it culturally mundane. They're 9 to 5s and this, but it's a pretty magical planet. It's pretty anomalous, but we've gotten so desensitized, I think, to some of that magic, and technology is a part of that. But that's my own perspective. But
I did want to add, when we were talking about implants, it's funny because I still do get Greer's emails, and just to keep up on what he's talking about. And he did have one where Clint, have you watched all 62 of Greer's testimonials?
I've watched a lot of them. I don't know if I've watched all 62, but I've seen quite a few.
So my funny thing is, I've watched all 62. I don't remember one of them, but he had the interview with William Pawelec on, and that's a really interesting interview, because William Pawelec, and I'll put the link down in our description. William Pawelec was a security guy. He worked in security, and he was a contractor, and he talked about how he started getting deeper and deeper into the black budget part of the military, and he talked about them. I can't remember if he was part of the ones that were making implants, but they had a small conference where he said 2 individuals that came there had all the right credentials, but they had no idea where they were from. And he said that they were asking all the right questions. And he said the way they asked them, like, they knew what they wanted. They were very cold about it. And the way they were asking the questions, like, how many billions of these implants can we make? How many, does the human body react to it? How's the biology? What does this? And how quickly can we get about 2 billion of them? And yeah, so it's a really good interview to check out for that from that sense, because when it comes to implants, it could possibly be our military working with NHI, and those implants, they might be made of some kind of metal that only the military can make, and it's a novel metal that we haven't seen before, but our black budget military has seen it before and are making these things, because he said the implants were passive.
Well, if you go on badaliens.info and you
Yeah.
look at the abductions link and you scroll down to where
Yeah.
the pictures are of
All the
the
pictures.
implants,
Yep.
some of those are straight up. Those are RFID.
Oh yeah.
Those are human-made implants.
Yeah, you can see
One by the
some of them.
dime.
Yeah, and it's funny because I thought of Matt Hurley's website there. We interviewed him a while ago. Boy, he was one of our first
3 years ago. I think it was like 3 years ago now.
But that's a great point, because when you look at those, it's kind of like, it looks like we could have made all of those, really. And then when I saw this William Pawelec interview, or reminded of it again and refreshed, it made me think, I just feel like the military has their hands in the NHI thing way more than a lot of people suspect, and especially when it comes to that, because in the interview he said they found that they could read an implant from a satellite in space. At first they thought it was 30 miles or 60 miles, and then they were like, oh, then we tried it in a satellite and we could read it from a satellite.
Yeah, that's an interesting. I do remember that one. That was one that was, because he in particular is very. He's one of those guys that you can just look at him and tell this guy's telling the truth. He's just not going to lie. It's
not to mention, he asked that the interview not be released until after he was dead.
Right. And there is my big question with abductions is, are they still happening? Are they happening more or less? How come we're not hearing about them the way we used to? And like, have we made any progress in understanding what's going on? Are those experiences changing from what they used to be, now that we're so connected and everybody's got access to all these other, anybody can watch an abduction interview, and then if you were to be regressed, would you just have that in your head? How do you know, like, what we're getting now is pure information? So I'm looking for people to talk to on my end who are experts in this area, and I just can't find anybody.
Oh man, you should talk to Caspian. He's one of our moderators, actually. We interviewed him a few years ago, and I'm still editing his interviews because we're creating graphics for it. He submitted a 200 page report, I think it was, Adam, to Bufon, a Birmingham UFO group in UK. But he's had paranormal and been abducted many times, and he says he's still seeing grays and Nordics and getting abducted, as well as another one, Deirdre. She's another experiencer that we have in our group, and she has more of a Nordic, but her abductions are more astral. Because I asked her, "Are yours physical or astral?" And she said they're mostly astral. And that's the other thing that people will not be able to either accept or want to entertain, is that you can be sleeping and they take your consciousness, and that's a scary thing. And another scary thing that I think another reason I think disclosure from the government will never happen, because they know it's true, is that the consciousness aspect is real, and they can't protect us. So if people are getting abducted both physically and consciously, how do you explain that to a population that there's nothing we can really do? We have a treaty with some of them. I don't even know.
The treaty thing, that confuses me, because it's like, what business? How do we enforce it?
Yeah,
like,
how do we?
In what court? Like, they can do whatever they want. So why don't they just do whatever they want? Like, if they don't need to ask us how many people they can abduct. They just come and take them. And even if we did make an agreement, who's to say that they have to abide by it? That part, but so many people have brought that up so many times, and it keeps coming up that there's got to be something there.
Well, yeah. Adam, did you have something to say to that before I ramble?
Yeah. But just in response to that last point, it gets to be, what makes a species civilized. Generally, they work together, they value consent, they value boundaries, and they're intelligent cognitively and emotionally. A lot of these NHI don't really operate under all of those factors. Some of them, yes, they seem to be intelligent in some ways. They seem to be very psychic in some ways, but do they respect boundaries? No, they don't. Do they respect consent? No, they don't. So why would a very advanced species be violating a very simple principle of boundaries and consent? We violate that with a lot of species here on Earth. We assume a lot of the animals, like in the meat industry, right? They're not. Oh, they're obviously they have brains. They're intelligent. Oh, but they're nowhere near the intelligence, as a human, which obviously is true for some things. But I'll just say a short experience I had with an elephant at the zoo, which is a very large being, has a very large brain, and by nature would we were talking about just like essentially our bodies emitting like a field of energy, like essentially via consciousness, which to me I just think of physics. It's just a magnetic field that is moving faster than the speed of light. But without digressing too much, I had almost like a psychic interaction with this elephant, and come to find out, I essentially live in the same area where I grew up, and it's just like a local zoo, and that was actually one of the same elephants I used to see as a kid. When I used to go through the zoo, the elephant's still there after like 30 something years, or whatever, 20 something years. So it was just odd. It was just a very interesting feeling, and a lot of psi interactions. It's not like it's not like Charles Xavier from the X-Men. You don't like beam in. It's just like a sense. It's very it's not, you can't really force it. It's very symbolic to like the Jedi way, where it's like don't force it, just let it come. Very symbolic to the philosophy of the Force. Easy way to explain it that way. But it's just very odd. But a lot of these NHI don't really seem to have these like type of consent and boundary issues. So it gets me very critical of their species and what happened to them, and why are they treating us this way, in a sense. I have my own experiences. Most of them, I guess you could say, are neutral. I've I guess rationalized them to be neutral, but I just see a very big disconnect using like the cultural standard of what a human is and an intelligent human and how they treat somebody else. I don't see that in a lot of these experiences. I see like almost like a bully taking a human and doing what they need to do. That could be anything, implants, abductions, this, and, there's always the guys that they're helping or doing this. They know more than you. Okay. That's good to know. But there's a thing called, teaching, support. You can help somebody. You don't need to be so elusive and mysterious and odd. Also,
You make a great point. You really, that's such a, and it's not discussed nearly enough. Do you find that people are there seems to be a lot of reflexive pushback to the notion that there could be any kind of a threat or any kind of a danger, and just by even bringing that up, you're almost like stepping on someone's kind of, I guess, fundamental beliefs about like what these things are what they're capable of. Do you find that a lot?
Yeah, I think people, and this is another really, archetype that's really kind of been consistent with human history. We want somebody else to save us. There's to either be a religious this, or political this, military, whatever, the superstar in the sports team saving the game. Like that's just, humans have been doing this for a long time. But when it comes down to the planet and the species as a whole, it's up to the humans as a collective. So yeah, it's very odd that there's such pushback. And just because, to me, in my eyes, just because somebody has a very fancy technology, doesn't mean that there's a fancier technology that's being utilized that we don't even know about. That's even more, I guess, more impactful, more, I don't want to use the word powerful, but more resourceful, I guess you could say, than some of the crafts or machinery apparatus, whatever you want to call it, that have been kind of showing up the last 80 years or so. Yeah, I'm very critical about things like that.
Yeah, it seems like there's a that's the part of the conversation that we're in right now. Like stepping back to something that you said a little while ago about where we're at in the conversation. It's like that slide from Carl Nell's presentation at the Soul Foundation. Remember that slide that leaked from his keynote, and he had the phases of disclosure. There were like 6 phases, and the last one I think was like 2035. That was like the end point. Was it 2035 or 2030? Somewhere around there. I'd have to go back and look at it again. And like step 1 was like get scientists talking about it. Step 2 was like normalize the conversation in the public, get the public to like accept that this is a and then step 3 was like get Congress acting on the information that the scientists agree is real now. And then it was like step 4, you know, and by step 6 it was like this has to be completed by this date or catastrophic disclosure. And then that blew up the internet. Remember that?
Yeah.
Yes.
Do you all get the sense? I have the sense that we're up against a hard time clock, and something is out there that's motivating all of this. There's some event or something's happening that's pushing. This isn't just happening for no reason, right? Like all these people, these high level people aren't just doing this because it's fun and they're excited. There's something forcing their hand.
I feel like go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, like, you can't get politicians from both parties to agree on anything. You can't even get them to agree on, like, should we give kindergartners, you know, free food? Like, they don't want to agree on anything. But then the Schumer amendment was a bipartisan agreement that sailed through the House and was ready to go. And then it just got picked apart at the last second. But it seems like the push is underway, and it's very bipartisan in a way that we just don't see cooperation in any other aspect of our government.
I was going to say that I believe that the push to get it done in a certain time is because it's on the catastrophic timeline. There's a planetary catastrophe that is imminent. I've seen this in so many little videos, I've just seen this in so many places. So I kind of feel like it's, but I've always felt that the military is going to, and the Pentagon is going to kick the disclosure can down the road till this catastrophe happens. And I think it's probably either the pole shift or a CME from the sun, a micronova. And I feel like they're going to kick it down the road so they don't have to disclose to the major population of 8 billion people. After this catastrophe, there's only going to be maybe, luckily, 1 billion people, because if a CME goes on, if from the sun and knocks out everything, it's going to be for a few years. And of course, you can't feed 8 billion people without electricity for a few years. So there'll be less people to be accountable to, or worry about. So I always feel like, personally, we'll never get disclosure. If there's going to be disclosure, it'll have to be catastrophic, and maybe controlled. I don't know. Maybe we're kind of halfway there. You know, from Nell's leading slide, we're kind of getting there, but the science still isn't solid yet. We don't have enough scientists looking at it and giving us data from it. But either way, my feeling is that it's just being kicked down the road to this catastrophe, because again, like Burisch said, there's like 2 timelines. I've heard there's like 6 or 7, because the military keep messing with time, and and all these timelines have to come back together at some point. And for some reason, like this catastrophe that's supposed to be happening in the 2030s. I think forget which remote viewing team looked into the future, but they were looking into the next 10 to 20 years.
Des Smith.
Yeah, they were looking.
I talked to him.
I think I saw your. This is from your interview. Yes, this is your interview with Des Smith. So he said that they looked in the next 20 or so years for something else, but this kept coming up because this was drawing all the remote viewers to them. But it's not just Des Smith's group. There's another remote viewing group too that also said that it was at the end of the 30s and the beginning of the end of the 30s, something planetary happens, catastrophe, and then the beginning of the 40s are when a new normal happens. And so to me, I feel like the military is just going to kick the can down the road, never disclose. And then after this catastrophe. Sure, because I mean the other thing.
Never let a good crisis go to waste. They're going to let the crisis happen. Then once it's over, they're going to respond and say, "Look, we saved the day."
Right.
And now we've got this whole new reset. We've got a whole new world, a new government, whatever. They're going to have to let the machine break before they can come out with whatever 2.0 is going to be. Have you seen that really weird? I'm sorry to cut you off, but you just reminded me of this. Did you see that really weird interview that Robert Bigelow did on Jeffrey Mishlov's New Thinking Aloud channel? Have you ever seen that?
Oh, no. I've seen clips, but I haven't watched the whole thing, no.
Okay, real fast. There's a crazy interview. You've got to watch it. Go on Jeffrey Mishlov's channel, which is just phenomenal. I love his guests are like unbelievably good. But he had one with Bob Bigelow, and Bigelow, to your point about the remote viewers, says this really cryptic, weird statement. And about 2/3 of the way through the interview, he goes, "Well, I've hired the best remote viewers in the world." And he's kind of put this team together, and he's like, "I've had our people looking at something for a while now, and from what we gather, the prospects don't look good for us. Like, it just really, just spend time with your family, get to know your kids. It may, hopefully it doesn't happen." He's just this is how he's talking. He's not saying what it is. He's just like, hopefully, but it doesn't look good. And you're just kind of like, okay, wait a second.
Yeah.
What am I supposed to do? Lou Elizondo's somber comment. John Ramirez saying by 2030 or 20, what does he say? 2028 or 2027, it'll all be over.
7. Well, I thought the 2027 comment was for, I thought it was for more disclosure, but I could be wrong. So I guess it's one of those things where, if you're in the UFO world and you've seen thousands of videos and read all the books, everyone believes something's going to happen. There's going to be some kind of catastrophic catastrophe on a planetary scale, and it's not just going to be volcanoes and earthquakes, but I like I said, I believe it's probably more of a coronal mass ejection or micronova from the sun, and the pole shift, possible pole shift. Who knows what comes first? But right now we can definitely see there's a pole shift going on. The pole's moving at a high rate, so that could be the first part of it. But other than that, I don't know. I'm sorry, I'm talking a lot. So Rem, if you have anything to add.
Well, what I want to say is my sister used to be an abductee. And when I had my first experience with my mother in the garden, which was a nuts and bolts experience, nothing more, my sister came down the stairs, and I usually keep that story out because, seeing a UFO is one, but abduction is a whole different thing. And she had a scar on her arm, a strange scar, and it's very cliche, because an abductee and has a scar. So my sister said, "I don't know what it is." And my mother saw it. I saw it. It was 1994, so it's a long time ago. I didn't believe her. And I was like, okay, she wants attention because we saw a UFO, etc., etc. So I didn't pay much attention to it. But the scar was strange, and it disappeared a few days later. But okay. Years later, I spoke to my sister. I said, "What was that?" She said, "I was on a table and beings were around me, but they wore masks, human masks." And I was like, "What? Human masks?" "Yes." "And I could see the black eyes through the holes. But they did this not to scare me, because I would be very scared if I saw their faces." And I was like, okay, that's a detail. That's a very nice detail. And so what I did, I was looking in history, in books, and I saw that John Mack had a book in which an abductee had told him about laying on a table and beings wearing masks, human masks. And I was like, wow, this is crazy. And it's a detail that you don't, you don't make such stuff up. Why would these beings wear human masks. It's when you want attention, you don't say those things. You say like, okay, I was in a craft and there were beings and they had gray faces, etc. But you're not saying they wore human masks. So I find it very, and my sister is a person who has paranormal activity all her life. And well, a lot of stuff happened, but I don't want to be too long about it. But I know that something is in her arm, and I really want her arm scanned. And it's difficult because in Europe, you know where to go to a doctor. Can I scan the arm? Because they look at you like. So it's not easy. But you know, if there is something in her arm, they should be able to find it or X-ray it and get it out. So I always have in the back of my head to have that done, you know. And okay, in the 90s, it was the 90s were really strange for me personally because I had a few experiences. Nowadays, I never see it. I've never seen a UFOs in the 27 years. But in the 90s, it was different. And the strange thing is that abductions were also happening a lot in the 90s. You had all these programs, TV programs like Sightings, you know, with abductions, etc. And now you don't hear much about it. So it's almost like there was a project or something and they finished it, you know. That's the idea I get from it. Yeah.
Well, I would definitely say that the abductions have not stopped.
What makes you say that?
Well, because again, in our experiencer group, they're still getting abducted. They're still getting, you know, like Caspian still says he's getting abducted and dealing with his Nordics. And if you talk to Caspian, he'll say, I wouldn't trust them with my, I wouldn't trust them as far as I could throw them with my pinky. He is just, and when it comes to like, see, when I said earlier about this is a consciousness phenomenon and it's crazy to think that, you know, people would even accept that because you can get abducted astrally. Well, then the other part of it is, like, I'm sure you know who Preston Dennett is.
Oh, yeah.
He's done plenty of shows where he talks about seeing dead loved ones with NHI.
The NDE abduction connection is really weird.
Yes.
It's like they're almost the same thing to many people.
Yeah, and so to me, that's also a point for the masses saying that, guess what? When we die, this thing doesn't end. It doesn't end. And Caspian and his mom both experienced things together. And one of the strange ones was they would be pulled out of their bodies in the evening up into a huge tunnel with a light at the end of the tunnel. And they'd go through the tunnel. And Caspian has no memories of what was at when they got past the light. His mom had a memory of going to some town with the real big dark square in the middle that looked like if you fell into it, you'd never return. But other than that, they had the same experiences of being pulled out of their beds in the evening for whatever reason. This wasn't even an NHI thing, but the point being, again, is that the abductions I don't think they've stopped at all. I don't know whether it's they're just not being reported enough. If you go to, you know, the experiencer sub, seems like there's still plenty of people talking about being abducted by either a mantid or a reptilian or a gray.
That's the thing, right? Like the abduction stories hinge for me on details, like you said, Remsey. Like you have to have, when someone really has a true experience that really physically happened to them, there's so much detail. You remember things. You're like, I remember it. I got up, I put on my favorite t-shirt, I made a cup of coffee. It was kind of bitter that day. It was cold outside. I walked outside, I turned to my car, there was the dog, and then I saw the thing. And it's like, you just remember it. It's locked in. It's when people are lying, they keep it vague. It's like, wow, so I was a space Marine, you know, and I fought, you know, I was what, you know, and okay. But it's like go ahead.
Well, it's a great point. Like, and it also brings up the idea that even when there are, say, with Caspian and his mom, when they experience two entities that just popped up in their living room, and before that, the typical paranormal mist would go in their living room, and then something would happen. But it also brings up the idea that it's not the same for everyone. those details aren't the same for everyone. Caspian said that when the two entities came out, he saw the black figures, the head, but there was like a red light shining out of both of their heads. His mom just saw the two black figures. He heard them say, "We want you to get something to scribe with, or a pen and pen."
I think his mother just saw orbs.
Yeah. Oh, that's right.
Yeah. His mother just saw orbs, and Caspian was actually able to see them in a different, present themselves differently, as well as understand some of their communication.
Yeah, because he said that his mom heard muffled voices, and he heard it clear, like, "We want you to go get something to write with, we want you to do this," and he had to write down symbols and so forth. But it speaks to the idea that as much as people can see saucers at the same time when they're outside in a forest, when there's a paranormal thing going on and they're both in the same living room, their experience can be different as well. And just experiencing the same thing, but they see or hear the different things. It's a thing about the phenomenon that needs to be taken into consideration too.
I was going to say that the two most interesting people right now that I found in this space, just real quick, are Donald Hoffman, who's a cognitive psychologist. Have you followed his stuff?
Yeah.
He said something really interesting recently on an interview that I saw. He said, if you took the electromagnetic spectrum and laid it out in a line as long as the Mississippi River, the amount of it that humans can perceive with our senses is about 1.5 inches down towards the bottom. And he said, so you have all of this other room in the spectrum where there could be complex intelligences and beings operating, and we just can't perceive them because we're not really seeing reality for what it is. And maybe that's where they're developing in somewhere out there in that space. It's not outer space in the sense that we think of outer space. It's this EM spectrum. They're somewhere in there, and they can phase in to our part of the spectrum. And so maybe for some people, we're a little more able to pick up on what we're seeing and see it more clearly,
right?
And other people can't. And that might be something that accounts for it.
Right.
And there's another guy named Andrew Gallimore. Are you guys familiar with Andrew Gallimore?
I don't think I've heard of him, no.
He's doing some really interesting research, I think, at Cambridge, where they're taking DMT and they're using like the anesthesiology techniques to slow drip DMT right into people's bloodstream. Yeah. And basically like that movie with William Hurt, Altered States, where they put them in the tank, send these people to hyperspace, but send them for extended times, like 2 hours. And then you come back and it's like, where did you go? What did you see? Did you see the temple? Did you see the beings? Who did you talk to? And if you did that with 100 people, would they go to the same place, or would they see different things? What would that be? I think that's so fascinating.
And the guy Thomas Campbell. Thomas Campbell.
Yeah, who worked with Monroe.
He's got the My Big Toe theories of everything.
Yeah, and it's very similar, where Monroe had a bunch of CIA guys come in, and they all experienced the same reptilian, well, not the same reptilian, but they all experienced reptilian beings. Mm-hmm. But it's very similar. But the DMT experience, I'm sure, would just be, I don't know if you ever heard that, forgot which comedian it was, but he took DMT and saw a purple lady, and said that they were like something before he incarnated, and then his friend took DMT but didn't want to say anything about what he experienced and let him go, and his friend said, there's a purple lady here that says hello, and he was like
well, Chris Bledsoe saw the lady in his experience. That was the most famous one in the last couple of years. He talked about seeing a blonde woman in flowing robes that was glowing, floating above the ground. She gives him this object. And then he puts it down and never talks about it again, which I thought was really strange. But there's something going on. And I think the biggest question right now is, are we talking about something physical, or are we talking about something that's non-physical, or are we just not clear on what where physical is? Do we even have the right idea of what reality is to talk about?
And I'm sorry, I got to jump in again, but I see Rem and Adam already say something. But you said if we put the electromagnetic spectrum on a line as long as the Mississippi, I think the other part of it is sensing it, but the other part is I want to say living it. But it's not just a sensory thing; it's also an existence, where we exist on that. Because I always want to make a line that shows our existence in our universe. This is the line, but there's also an electromagnetic spectrum of sorts above and below, and and it's also how we exist. It's not just what we perceive. So I think that's the other part that you have to kind of wrap your mind around, because these NHI are able to pop in and out of our existence. How do they do it? Maybe they're cloaking. Maybe they stay in our existence, but it's clearly looking like there's different dimensions, and the dimensions are real, and that we have to start thinking that way. There's higher planes, lower planes, vibration. Like Tesla said, if you want to know the universe, think of it as a frequency, vibration, and an energy, frequency, and vibration. And I think that's the other part of how we have to start thinking. It's not just what we perceive, but it's also how we can feel it and move around in these existences. So sorry, Adam or Rem. I don't know if who wants to go first. I'll just say go, Rem.
Yeah, well, I recently I thought like, okay, the only thing you will ever possess is your consciousness. Yeah, and that's it.
But maybe not.
So consciousness, what is it? It's fundamental, because it's the only thing you will ever possess. Not your car, not your house, not even your family, but your consciousness and your experiences is what you take with you if there is a life beyond. I think we have to think about when you talk to SimCity characters and you say like, okay, in what kind of world do you live? And they say, well, in a physical world, because we have streets, we have houses, we have cars. You see, it's all, I can touch it. But you are the outsider, and you are saying to this person, no, because I made you. I programmed this reality for you. And they look at you like, oh, you're crazy, So that's the thing I want to point out. Our reality may be consciousness. Everything we experience is consciousness. But this is some kind of defined, we know water boils with 0 degrees Celsius, etc. These are laws. So even consciousness can have laws. So then this reality is in essence, the building bricks the energy is consciousness. But the laws make what we see and experience. And that's maybe also the reason why we don't perceive so much, because it's programmed into our reality, And so there is a purpose for us being here. Everybody knows it. And the purpose, in my opinion, is that this is a consciousness machine. All we have to do is live, and when we die, we are a bit wiser than when we are born. So we gain something. And what that is it energy? Is it spiritual energy? I don't know. I cannot say it. But we all feel inside that this is the case, that we need to learn. And in the end, this consciousness is expanding and maybe creating other worlds, other universes, and that's how I see it. Yeah, in a nutshell.
And I'd also just throw in there how we're seeing lots of scientific papers come out about we're living in a virtual reality. We're living in a construct, and I think that's the part where I'll go back to Ray Hernandez and the greater reality and consciousness is everything and connects everything. I'll go back there and I'll say that when I look at all these papers, they always say, okay, it's looking like we're living in a virtual reality of sorts. And like say in the raw material, it says this is the illusion. What I like to kind of tell people is they never say what the reality is if this is the virtual reality. And what I want to say is, yes, we are in a virtual reality, and our true reality is pre and post death. That astral consciousness plane, or whatever you want to call it, astral plane, consciousness plane, that is home. That is the home. And for some reason, somehow in this material reality that we're experiencing, we learn more quickly because of these emotions we feel. And somehow in that home area, we know everything. We're connected to source, or whatever you want to call it. We know again, I can refer back to the raw material, how you have that connection, you're already there, you have almost every question answered that you need, but there's still a learning to experience, and experience raises that vibration of yours. And that's why it's better to come here in this, not necessarily Earth, but this universe, this reality, to learn and grow and raise your vibration to, I guess, get closer to source eventually after a few billion years. But Adam.
I really agree with Rem in the sense that, there really does seem to be this field of everything, and there's a division of everything that we know of, and if experience is just a division of that, main field. And I think I mentioned most of my background's in psychology, and there's a lot of like psychological literature, research, there's decades of it, understanding the interaction between mind body, how they really influence each other drastically, but also work together in unison. But you can definitely mess with your mind if you have issues with your body, or vice versa. If you have really issues with your cognition, or really just your your mental state, those can deviate into the body. And I think the biggest factor that our science has missed, and can't necessarily blame them for missing it, but yeah, we have another body. It's called the soul. It's called, your light body, astral body, chakra system, whatever you want to call it, energy field. Yeah, we do have that. It's not woo, it's physics. It's how things work. Things that are alive have magnetic fields. We can measure some of these fields. EKG, EEG, like we're measuring these fields, but when you look at the actual utilization of this technology, it is so primitive. We're starting to do a little bit more like in neuroscience, where the most accurate information you can get is going right into the brain. That's the best way to get it. There is no other way outside of doing, amplifying this, using a type of gel to do this, using, better metal, using a better program to, record the separate nodes for EEG. But outside of going into the actual brain, we can't, we don't have that type of technology. And mainly I'm talking about the technology to measure the neuron. There's so many more interactions happening that are much, much smaller than the neuron, like the microtubule. And I'll have to do shout out to Penrose and Hammerhoff for their work for OR theory of consciousness, which is, I think, a great step and a great foundation for the theory of how it can work, where it's not, humans aren't independent from this field of consciousness, and we're not independent from physics, even though we function like we are. We're not, where it's really all part of this one thing. We're all part of nature. I think Earth, in the timeline that we know in the last 1,000 years, is unique. Earth is a freaking ghetto. In its sense, it seems to be, there's like a very bad analogy is like it's a bad corner in the city. There's just like some really bad things that happen here. Unfortunately, that a lot of things humans do ourselves, and there's also some other very negative things that happen from other NHI and things like that with that interaction between humans. But I can't blame somebody for questioning, like, why is this occurring? Like, why would this happen? How could this be here? How can we all be part of the same thing if there's all these negative things happen? That doesn't seem to make sense. And no, it doesn't. I think Earth is a very unique planet, and we're on it on a very unique time. And there's a reason why things don't make sense. And I think everybody really has their own independent experiences in hopefully their own mind to try to really uncover these very odd mysteries of Earth, because they're really everywhere. And a lot of people get it through ufology, which I think can be a good opening to a lot of consciousness phenomenon. Mm-hmm. But to kind of bring it back to my earlier point, where we essentially have another body. I've read before where some like certain diseases are primarily spiritual in a sense, which goes in this a much more complicated thing when it comes to disorders and syndromes and diseases. Obviously we have our, physical immune system, we got our physical body, but what about, this astral immune system, or the immune system of your energy field or chakra system? It's just physics. It's just magnets at the end of the day. Like, just to simplify it, the correlations between how quantum physics works and how water works and how things work in water is unreal. It's the same thing. I'm not the first person to say this. And, we formulated a very advanced standardized model of physics and particle physics, and due to things that we can measure, right? From measurements and mathematics and probabilities. What happens if the mathematics are incorrect, or if they interpreted a variable incorrectly in the 1950s or the 1960s? Academia works by building off of itself. That's the reason why it took decades to get a book like this, because there is no other, if we can see it, no, you can kind of see it. Yeah, there is no other foundation academically for something like this. That's why it's so hard to do, because you can't just, you can't be like, oh, I have a great idea. Let me just, let me just pull a Dr. John Mack and, let me just interview these kids that have experiences with aliens. The dude had to fight every day after he made that choice to keep his tenure. And this isn't just like, it was a start to keep his tenure. And tenure is something, you get when you're a professor. It's like, oh, you're all set. You can start acting up. You can start slacking. You don't have to sign your papers on time. But
and it was Danny Sheehan who defended him at Harvard.
Yeah,
that's a great story.
And at the end of the day, what science really should just be uncovering the truth. Like, yeah, we utilize the scientific method for that, but at the same time, there is some corruption in some of our scientific plateaus, because it revolves around money. And at the end of the day, funding, how are you going to get your funding for your next large Hadron Collider that's going to cost, $10 billion? How are you going to get that funding? That's a lot of money, and definitely a lot of people, a lot of jobs are, involved in that. But it's a system we've developed to make it work, but not the first one saying these things. Revisit the ether model to physics, and I believe the species will start actually doing some very good things in terms of understanding energy, and not just propulsion energy, but also energy of like the human being. Again, Nikola Tesla laid it down, slapped the stamp right on there, and I'm looking forward to the day when his name is actually truly glorified, in the sense, well, this dude actually, he had it right. And he didn't have the tools or the foundation a lot of people had. He kind of just had the obsession to invent and the obsession to understand how things work, and just, the worth ethic as well. But he's very prominent in saying, he didn't believe he did what he needed to do. He said he failed. He wanted to do, he wanted really, free energy, very low cost energy for the whole world. He said he failed. To me, that's humble, especially when you're like an inventor at that caliber, to say you failed at something like that. I don't think a lot of scientists really even get close to doing something as big, or even get close to admitting, hey, like that research I did, it was 10 years of research. Actually, like, it's all kind of not good. And there's a lot of that in psychology too. But you don't really hear, those academics saying, oh, that was a mistake. But you do sometimes. But it's rare that you get some, an academic to kind of say that, because it's, doesn't really look good on themselves.
I think that's a great point about materialism just in general being kind of like dead, but no one really, well, not no one, but only a few people are really saying it right now. And I think maybe 10, 15, 20 years from now, that'll just be commonly accepted that materialism was just a mistake. Yeah. And wherever we're at now, I wonder sometimes if that really is the big secret, the big cover up, the big secret at the bottom of it all is that we actually are in a simulation. They figured that out 40 years ago, and they just know it. And they're like, well, these aliens, they just have root access to the simulation. They can bounce between levels and we can't. We're stuck on this level.
Yeah. And I think that there's still even a point where we don't know that we can bounce around, but our black military does. Our black military may have been given that technology. We don't know for sure, but it's possible. But
that's why many people speak about propulsion, and I'm like, okay, but if you can hack reality, you don't even need propulsion.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
we should change our whole way of thinking.
Yeah.
I think that's a big hiccup too, where you think technology, we think, you think a computer, type of machine, rocket, these things, the black mirrors. But, I've started to realize, and kind of going back to a lot of anomalous phenomena for ancient cultures, like especially like the Vedic cities and things like that. We're talking about these types of technology traveling distances without any type of machine or anything like that. It gets very, very interesting where we think of technology as something physical, some type of apparatus, material, something that we put together. But in reality, I see highly, highly advanced technology and potential in just the human body in itself. And, I don't really like biology at all, but when you really boil it down and you start reading, just seeing like, oh, the body does that. And I'm not even telling it to, it does this, it does that. It's like, what the hell is this? Like, what is this? This is kind of crazy when it comes down to it. It's way more sophisticated than put fuel in, fuel makes engine go boom, and then the craft moves.
Every cell is conscious.
Yeah, and and then you think the next level is like, oh wow, these UFOs, they seem to manipulate gravity in some way or another, do this, do that, but then bringing it back to Rem's point, where it's like, well, do you even need that craft to begin with? If that theory actually really can work out, do you really need that craft, or do you need to actually just cultivate those skill sets? And maybe it takes a long time to cultivate those types of skill sets to be able to do very I guess you could say at like, godly consciousness phenomenon. But, I'd recommend anybody checking out the Vedic cities. Very interesting. The loose translation is like, superpower, but it wasn't, that's like a modern term for it. But what it is, it's just, these are just things you could do after, you devoted your life to essentially, being not a guru, but essentially meditating and cultivating these skills. So very interesting. Just a last point to tie in like the ayahuasca and a lot of the DMT research that they're doing. Yeah, they're finding correlations between, DMT, I guess DMT use at a certain dosage and experiences with beings. And it seems to be pretty consistent where they're able to do our methods and basic or general psychological methods to testing research. And they're finding that. So now it's another interesting variable where it's like, whoa, like we're having these experiences with these beings, but it's not, we're actively seeing their physical body here, but they're having this entire experience and communication that is outside of time. Their time perception is way different than, the actual time that they're in, dose whatever with DMT. So it's just another variable that, again, opens up a lot more questions now to the phenomena. But I feel like, the non-physical abduction, something that kind of Ray talks about, other people too, but, there's a lot of spectrums, ufology, nuts and bolts, the woo. To me, it's D, all of the above. It's kind of everything. That's really my big takeaway. Yeah, there's a lot of stuff going on. It's not simple. It's not easy to explain. It's highly complex. But I think that complexity can be deciphered with the right mind and the right quality of time.
Right, listening to all of this, it's like you got so many things going through your own. All you read, it's like, I want to talk about.
Feel your brain getting hotter. You're just like, my brain is sweating.
It's so true. I mean, especially with consciousness. I mean, with the consciousness thing, it's like, oh man. And I've always wanted to get Donald Hoffman. I would love for him to talk to several experiencers. It'd be so interesting to hear his idea of, what's going on, what he thinks consciousness, what's going on consciously, or like, what I did want to say when Rem said, all we have is our consciousness. It reminded me of the book that Carla Turner wrote called Masquerade of Angels. Yeah. And that was with, it turns out being, his name was Tim, I forget his last name, Tim is what I remember now, and he recently just came out, I think. But man, there is some really dark stuff going on there. And one of the things we learn in there, if it's true, is that they can just take your consciousness and put it in a box and then move it to a different body. And we've heard that with super soldiers saying, "Oh yeah, we were taken and then they put us in these super bodies or whatever." But to hear that, like say in the Masquerade of Angels, when he said I believe if I'm remembering this correctly, he saw another body that was his, and then they gave him this yellow or green goo, and suddenly next thing he knew, he was in the other body, but he knew that there was something they put his consciousness in. So that's another scary thing, because Russell Targ said that Pat Price, I remember Greer was interviewing Russell Targ, and it was really tough because Greer just kept, he kept interrupting and saying, "Oh, well, I do this." It's like, "Oh, let Russell speak, please let Russell speak." But Russell was talking about when Pat Price was viewing Mars and Jupiter and a few other places, Russell just started saying, but he said, "Be real careful, because they can take you and they can keep you there, and you'll just be an empty body and possibly," I think he said, "possibly die." But he didn't say it in those words. It was roughly what he said. But of course, Greer just interrupted and said, "When I do remote viewing," and it's like, no, let him go on. But it's kind of scary to think of the possibility that maybe we don't have our consciousness, and it's all we have. Maybe we can be hijacked or pulled away and kept in a little box.
It's like before germ theory, you just got sick and died. And then we figured out there were germs, and we looked at, and now we have this whole science built around dealing with germs and viruses and all of the different little microorganisms that affect us. I wonder to what extent consciousness is just as a fundamental baseline fabric of reality. We've skipped right over that because we never looked at the bars of the cage. We never looked at the walls of the jail that we're in, so we don't see it. It's like a fish in water. We can't see it, so we're not measuring it. And if we took that time to really step back and account for consciousness fundamentally, you could build technology devices that would expand, focus, amplify your consciousness. And maybe the most compelling thing I've heard is that a UFO or a craft is like a quantum computer that you can entangle your consciousness with, and it becomes a consciousness amplifier.
Yes.
And so you become the craft becomes you, and now you're capable of doing things you couldn't normally do.
Right.
And I wonder, like, let's say you took a temple full of Shaolin monks and you dropped them off on another planet, and you came back 10 million years later after they'd had 10 million years to evolve. What would that society look like? What kind of Atlantis type world would they have built? We've taken one path. We've taken one developmental path, and it's, combustion and chemistry and all the stuff that we've developed. But the ancient Egyptians had a really advanced system of understanding the universe that didn't involve any of this shit. And maybe we're just missing a big piece of the puzzle that indigenous people have had for a long time. And did you ever see that video of there was some two people from an Amazonian tribe, an indigenous pair that was on this podcast, and they were asking them, they showed them a picture of the Greys.
Yeah.
You see this?
Oh yeah.
They're like, "Oh yeah, that. We see those all the time."
Yeah. Yeah, they live in the underworld.
They're the ant people. Yeah. You didn't know about that? Is that what do you call it, an alien? Oh yeah, that's Larry. They just knew.
Yeah.
Maybe that's just the big thing, is our science is just incomplete. Like embarrassingly incomplete.
And that's like what I was saying earlier about woo. I mean, if we want to make a new definition of woo, it's just it's just a science we haven't discovered yet. Or are unable to measure yet. That's it. For the materialists, it's over once we're able to measure consciousness or figure out how telepathy or telekinesis, I believe all those things really can be a thing. Like I believe Uri Geller somehow bends spoons, and because I forgot her name, she's very popular in the UFO community, and she's a MyLab. She's a military abduction, but she teaches it She says usually about 2 out of 20 students are able to just bloop, bend the spoon with no problem. Maybe about 10 or 15 people can kind of make the spoon weaker so they can bend it easier. But I mean, again, this consciousness thing, I think I sent you the Lacerda interview or the paper where she kind of describes the Feldrum, which is kind of like the sphere of
the sphere of influence.
Yeah, the sphere of influence, like that's
Something like that.
kind of like when Dan Burisch was saying he'd be about 60 feet away from the gray, and they were able to communicate at that point. So maybe there's that sphere of influence or that Feldrum. But again, once we are able to measure this, and I don't think that it's something that we're missing. I think it's something that's being kept from us. I think it's definitely something that we're not. That as much as we can as individuals figure it out, I feel like it's being kept from the society as a whole. I feel like it is a secret that we're being held back on. That's my theory.
I think to some extent, a lot of it, people can settle for themselves. Like if you get your hands on some DMT or you go do ayahuasca, you'll know. You'll know for sure that this stuff is real. I did. That's my ayahuasca experience was the thing that convinced me to change my whole life, that this was real. I met my son 5 years before he was born at a time when we were told that we couldn't have children by multiple doctors.
Okay, we have minutes. You said, let's start with your ayahuasca.
Yes.
From the beginning. Tell us, please.
I'll tell you the short version, and then if you have questions, I'll go into anything you want. My wife's Peruvian. So we go to Peru to visit her family, and we spend time there whenever we're there. So, and I, as a photographer, I go there to work and stuff. So, I had an opportunity to go for a couple of weeks, and she, as a gift for my birthday, arranged for me to partake in an ayahuasca ceremony. So there was a group in Cusco that was doing this, and they bring a medicine man in or a shaman from a different region, and then he administers the ceremony. So we got signed up. There was they all do it differently, but in my case, it was a vegan diet for like 2 weeks, no prescription medication. You had to kind of purify your body. And then 48 hours before you do the ceremony, no food, you just kind of fast. And then you go in and you do the ceremony. So I had this, we start out in Cusco, and then we go all up to this tiny, teeny little, it was a little house basically out in the middle of nowhere. I mean, just nowhere. And it was nighttime. It was cold. My wife had oxygen sickness, so she's on an oxygen tank, and she's just trying to like get me through this thing. So I do the ayahuasca ceremony, and during the ceremony, it was just me and 3 other people, or me and 2 other people. Me, 2 women that were doing the ceremony. So 3 of us doing the ceremony, and my wife was off to the side, and then the shaman had an assistant. So that's who was in the place. And I took it was about a coffee cup size cup, about half full of ayahuasca. So whatever that is, like 4.5, 5 ounces, something like that. And I drank it. It's awful. It tastes like motor oil and burnt coffee and dirt, and just it's the worst possible thing you could ever want to taste. And I drink this, and I lie back on this mat, and I'm like, oh man, there's no going back. Like I just took the pill. Like whatever's going to happen, this is going to happen now, and I have to just go with it. So I'm laying on this mat, and for like 20 minutes, it's just quiet. You can't hear anything. And then out of my right ear, right behind my head, I hear a female voice start to giggle, as clear as a bell, just like somebody was standing next to you giggling. And there's no one behind me. There's no one next to me. I'm basically by myself off to the side. And I lay there for another 10, 15 minutes. Then you get sick, you purge. There's a whole process that happens. And then the trip really comes on. And when it came on, I was laying on this mat, and I remember it like someone took a fader knob, like a dial, and they just turned that dial, and the real world, the world that we're in right now, turned to like steam. Is the best way I can describe. Turned to like dust, like fog. It just almost evaporated. And I was in this space that felt like an infinite space. I felt like a bubble of consciousness floating in an infinite space. And it was made out of fractals. It was like Alex Gray painting. If you go look at the artist Alex Gray, and you type in his thing into a Google search and look at any of the paintings he's done, that's where you go. That's where I went. And in that period of time, I encountered a number of different beings that were all intelligent. They a lot of them felt very big. One of them was like, it, from my vantage point, appeared to be like 200 feet tall, had the body of a human, but the head of a bird. This mask. There was. I went from like place to place. The female voice. Ayahuasca is a female spirit. So when you deal with ayahuasca, you're usually dealing with a female spirit. And she spoke to me. She said, in my mind, I heard this voice. It was my first experience with real telepathy, where I really felt that I was communicating with somebody. And she goes, "Are you ready?" And I said, "Okay." And she would just shoot me through this almost like a Stargate, where you feel like you're just getting fired through a cannon to another side of the galaxy, and we'd get to another region, and I would start to get downloads about my life. And it would just be these complete concepts, these total downloads of like everything I had a question about, everything that was going on in my life when I thought of the question, the people that I was dealing with. I could experience events from their vantage point. I got to see their perspective and experience their emotions, friends and family. I got this whole life. I don't want to say a life review, but it was like a life review. And in that process, as that was going on, I was shown a vision of this kid, this little child. It was like a little child made out of light. I can't explain it any other way. And you know how when like with your kids, like you have that moment where you look at this person, you just know like, oh, okay, I'll jump in front of a bus for you. Like whatever I need to do, I'll do. I had that feeling, and I was like, what is this? I didn't know what it was, but this kid had a very specific personality. And then I came back, and a lot of other things happened, but the process ended, and I told my wife, I was like, "This happened to me. I don't understand what happened. I really don't know how to place it." And it wasn't until 5 years later that, against all medical knowledge that we had, we were told that we could not have kids for a number of different reasons. But 5 years later, we had a kid. We had one boy, and that's my son, and that's who I met in this vision. And I somehow knew, I just knew that I'd met the same child. And when he was born, I go, that's him. And and the older he gets, the more his personality develops, and he becomes his own little person. It's even more reinforcing me in that line of thinking that there is something there. I went to another place. I was able to experience a precognition of this event that hadn't happened or wouldn't happen for years, and then it did. So I was sold. I said, okay, something's going on here. My picture of reality is just not what I thought it was. And after that experience, a lot of things changed. Like my personality changed. I gave up alcohol. I stopped drinking. I started thinking differently about my goals in life. My the things I wanted to accomplish weren't as important as they used to be. I had new ideas about what was important to me. It just changed everything. It changed my entire life. This one experience. It was really, really powerful. So that's what happened to me.
That's fascinating. When you saw your kid, or who would be your son, you said he was more. Was he a ball of light, or could you see a face? Could you see a body? What?
It was like it's a silly comparison because it's not exactly accurate, but the best way I can describe it was he didn't have a gender at that time. It was just the spirit energy of a child. I couldn't tell if it was a boy or a girl. I just couldn't tell. I thought it was a girl, but I didn't know for sure. And I don't know why I thought that. I guess I just decided that in my mind. And I describe it like this little child energy was like kicking through the wall, and like the Kool-Aid man, like running through a wall and just bombastic, full of energy, just like wild and being silly and just bursting with energy. There was no place for that in my life at this time. Like I had we'd been told no kids. I wasn't even on my radar. I wasn't thinking about it, but I had this super clear vision. And it was, when you walk into a room with someone who's got like a really strong energy, you just feel like a good friend or a family member that you just love, and you hug them and you feel that. That's what it was. You just know it. And then, that was my kid.
So it was, in essence, it was a spiritual experience, and it changed your life. That's in essence what it comes down to.
I felt like I interpreted it as watching someone dial the transition fader knob from this dimension to like there's another dimension or another, I called it like the green room for this reality. There's like a green room backstage, and you can go there, and I could feel people coming and going. I could see almost like you're seeing it with your third eye, so it's like a different kind of seeing, but you just know there's beings coming and going. They all seem very big, very large, very tall, and they were just passing through it, kind of ignoring me, not really paying much attention to me. But then I would get this download, and it would be like this full blast of information, and it just would, like an attachment in an email, it just open up in your brain and unzip the file, and you were like, oh, okay. Well, now I know what's going on with me and my brother. I understand that whole problem, and now I can go fix it. Oh, I know what I need to say to my mom, or I know how I need to talk to this person,
There are people with near-death experiences who come back to their body and they say it's like a jail. This whole life is a jail. Yeah. And they know there is a purpose, but they also know that this is not the life they want to have, but okay, they chose for it. So did you have that experience that after such experiencing this freedom?
I was glad to be back when I got back, because it was pretty unnerving. Like, it was my first go round, so I didn't really know what to expect, and for me it was a pretty powerful experience. So it took me, this was back in like 2016, so I'm only just now getting to where I would do it again. But it was enough, it was so real that eventually I had to stop talking about it, because people were sick of hearing about it. I was just like, okay. But it felt more, it felt like baseline reality is there, and it's just out of reach. It's just on the other side of the veil, and there are some, and what it convinced me of is that there are ways you can tune this brain. You can tune it with chemicals. There are ways that you can activate it, and you can use it as a gateway. This is the gateway. And you can go there. That's why I like what Andrew Gallimore is working on with his DMT research. It's like, and shaman do this all the time. They take a substance, then they go to another world. The difference between a regular person and a shaman is the shaman has training. They have a cultural context for all of this stuff. They have a language. They have a way to understand it, put it into words and a framework, so they can travel to the other worlds or other side or whatever you want to call it. And they can go there like we would go to the post office, and they can go and do business and talk to people and come back, and they're like, okay. I think that's the gap we have to jump. We've got to, in the West, we have to jump that gap and figure out how to roll that knowledge back into our culture somehow, and then use it to build a better world. Because this world sucks. Like, this world's awful. We got to do something. This can't go on. I think we all agree that there's no way that the current set of living arrangements that we have on planet Earth has no future. There's no future in it.
UFOs, the subject of UFOs may be the only subject capable of pulling it off. Yeah. To bring us to the next level.
Yep. Because there's a payoff for materialists. There is nuts and bolts now. It's giving us some nuts and bolts to work with. So that's why this thing with Carl Nell and Wall Street, I think, is like a bellwether event. I think that is actually a bigger deal than the Schumer Amendment. Forget the Schumer Amendment for a second. The people who are going to pass the Schumer Amendment are on Wall Street. You need to go there and talk to them. They're the ones who are going to get that legislation passed. So the hedge fund guys and the venture capitalists, I hate to see that. I hate the idea of venture capitalism trying to take over the UFO phenomenon, but I don't think they can handle it anyway. So it might be that's what's necessary in our system to make disclosure happen, but then it's going to be too big for them. You're not going to be able to make $1 trillion off of this when it all comes out. It's just, I think it's going to break the machine, and money won't matter.
Yes, absolutely. And there's different paths too, because like you're saying, Carnell was at a Wall Street thing. It wasn't some kind of UFO convention, and it was, as you said, a bellwether. It made total sense to me, because there's that path, get those Wall Street execs to come in and maybe fund something for more research. And then there's the other path that we've been trying, but it hasn't been working as well as the threat. We have aircraft in the air. These things might run into them. We need to figure out what they are. So that's been working okay, but it seems like creating several paths to try to get this information out is the best way. And that is something I definitely noticed when Nolan was at that event last year, and now Nell, and Nell was taking Grush's place, wasn't he? Wasn't Grush supposed to be there, but then Nell stepped in for him?
I think Grush did a separate presentation for a different Wall Street group that was a closed door private thing at someone's like home.
Yeah.
And this was by invitation only from some hedge fund guys. Yeah. See, this is the thing, right? Like what if I really want to know what I think, this is what I really think is going on.
I do want to know what you think, Clint.
You really and again, I make a big point on my channel of saying I'm not an expert and I don't have any answers, but I have questions. And I think that's more important, is that asking the right questions is more important than everybody's got an answer. But I have some questions. My hypothesis is this. There's no question. You can look around and see, like, we're in the biosphere is in a state of chaos. Like, where the biosphere on this planet could collapse at any moment. I think that if you're looking for the big elephant in the room, the blinking red light with the alarm coming off and this, sparks flying out of it, it's the environmental catastrophe that's going on right now. It's the fact that we didn't do anything about it 40 years ago when we had a chance. And now they've pushed this can so far down the road that 1.5 degrees C is like a distant memory. We're going to blow right past that. Well, at a certain point, 3-4 degrees C, we set off a chain reaction of self-reinforcing feedback loops that can cause a methane burp that could end all organized civilization on this planet. Not to belabor the environmental crisis. It's been done enough, but to give people an idea of the scope of the problem. So that's the problem, right? That's the elephant in the room. The conspiracy is they don't really want to change the system, because to change the system the way that we would need to means no more cars, no more airplanes, no more meat industry, no more factory farm. All that's got to go. Yeah. And not like phase it out over 50 years. It's got to go like in 5 years. So it would be drastic, total, complete, and no one's going to buy that.
Right.
So what's your other option? Okay. Well, the other option is, if you're a bunch of scientists, engineers, intelligence people, and military analysts who are looking at data all day, and you're looking at this data, and if you're a military person, a strategist, you're looking at these hotspots around the world, you're looking at the threat multiplier of climate catastrophe, you're looking at the timeline that we have to work with, and our best scientists, our best people are saying 2050. You got to have this figured out by 2050 or it's over. Okay. Well, guess what? We're sitting on the next 10,000 years of technology. We've got it at Los Alamos in a lab. There's a bunch of it at S4. How much money do you think that would be worth at a time of crisis right about now? Right. I think it's worth a few $100 trillion. If you could roll out right now and commercialize just a little bit, you don't have to bring out everything, but just a little bit, better superconductors, better metamaterials. We can build that fusion reactor we've all been talking about, but suddenly we can build it much cheaper, much more effectively, and we can build hundreds of them. And now who's going to get that contract? The Halliburton of whatever, of hydrogen fusion reactors. Yeah. The space race that we're on right now, Jeff Bezos, Elon Musk, Bob Bigelow, all these people who are trying to get out into the next, the solar system and mine it for resources, establish colonies. That's going to call upon us to dig into the basement and pull out all that secret sauce technology that we've been working on for 75, 80 years and start making some money off of it. I think that's what you're seeing. I think that's where the sharks at Wall Street are circling. They're like, okay, we got to get our hands on this.
Right. But then I think about Ben Rich saying that it's going to take an act of God to get it out. But I see where you're coming from. It's do you know who David Adair is?
Why is that name? The name's familiar, but I can't put a face to it right now.
He's the guy that made the fusion rocket and made the fusion rocket back in the day. And he landed it at Area 51, went down in there, and they showed an iris door opening, and he went in and went into this NHI craft that was shaped like his rocket. But anyways, but he's always been about this, just like you're saying, going into space. He goes, if we go into space, we can make these materials up in space that are this. But yeah, absolutely same. I agree with you. I just feel like
have you seen the Amy Eskridge? Have any of you followed Amy Eskridge's story?
No.
Okay, Amy Eskridge was a researcher who ran a organization called what was it called?
Gravity.
Do you guys know what I'm talking about? She had this organization of anti-gravity researchers. They're based in Huntsville, Alabama, which is where Ross Coulthart just gave that presentation to the Scientific Coalition for UAP Studies, also in Huntsville, Alabama. And there was also an anti-gravity researcher named Ning Lee at the University of Huntsville, Alabama. Turns out, come to find out, Huntsville, Alabama is not only the center of all this aerospace research, and it's the rocket city. It's also one of the cities that is the most heavily targeted for foreign agents' espionage activities, is Huntsville, Alabama. There's a woman named Amy Eskridge. She, I believe, committed suicide, at least as far as my research has been able to tell me. She killed herself. She gave an interview on this podcast about her anti-gravity work. And you can go find this interview. It's really weird to watch. She's drunk during the interview. She's drinking and she's just kind of hammered. And she says, for about 3 minutes, she gives this little speech. She goes, "We could be so far. I can tell you the names of all these researchers who have worked for NASA, and they have developed these prototype devices that are gravity control devices. They work exactly the way you think they do. The first time you turn them on, you get exactly the result you thought you were going to get. And then you go to NASA and you apply for more funding, and then they cancel your project. They send it to NASA divestment, and it's sold to scrap metal dealers who buy it and melt it down for scrap metal." And she's like, "I know dozens of scientists who are ready to come forward or kill themselves because they can't get anywhere, and they know where we could be, the technology that we've got in the lab, but they will never let it get out of the lab."
And let me tell you, I'm in Huntsville, Alabama. I know I've said that several times. We're the Rocket City. We're the biggest deal you've never heard of. Von Braun was here and we won the space race. We developed the Saturn V here. We built the Saturn V here. We won the space race here in Alabama, whether you've heard of it or not. And I can tell you for a fact, so many prototypes. Only prototype built like this in the world. You turn it on the first time, it works exactly like you thought it would the first time. Great data. You apply for more funding to test it more thoroughly, they cancel it. It goes to NASA divestment. It goes to the auction block. People bid on it. And literally scrap metal vendors win the bid and melt it down for scrap metal and sell it. We could be crazy far. We could be on the moons of Jupiter. We could be exploring Pluto that isn't even a planet anymore if we had spent money differently. I can tell you the names of so many NASA scientists that are depressed and they want to kill themselves because they have built prototype after prototype after prototype in Huntsville, Alabama. First in the world, never before seen, worked the first time you turned it on exactly like you thought. And it was canceled and melted down for scrap metal. Because if they reward you with success, you rest on your laurels. I'm so fucking smart, I never have to try again. But if they cancel, you're constantly trying to prove yourself. You're constantly trying to solve the next problem. Because the last problem, you solved it, you didn't get recognition. So the next problem, you're going to solve it again, even faster, even harder to get recognition. They cancel it again. They give you another problem.
Life, liberty, and the pursuit of dopamine.
No, they psychologically abuse. They psychologically abuse their smartest people. They've done it to
squeeze them. They're squeezing them. That's what they're doing.
They squeeze them. True. Here's a problem, solve it, cancel. Here's another problem, solve it, cancel. Prove yourself. They have all these geniuses that are constantly trying to be like, damn, I've worked at NASA for 40 years and nothing I've ever done in my entire career has been deployed. Cancel. I need to try harder on the next one, or my career is a failure and I've wasted my entire career of being a genius. Guess what? All of those ideas got applied and optimized for the secret space program, motherfucker. You never saw the success. You never got the satisfaction. You never got the pat on the back. You never got the dopamine. And it means that you work harder on the next problem to prove yourself so your career isn't a waste after 30, 40 years. That's what they do in Huntsville, Alabama. They psychologically abuse you into solving problems forever. Idea factory. Straight up, they abuse you. They really do. they withhold the satisfaction because it makes you solve the next problem better if you withhold the satisfaction. And what I learned, my first job was at 15 at the Weapons Sciences Directorate for AMRDEC. I did not apply for that job. I did a science fair project in piezoelectrics, and I got a call from the Army, and they offered me a job.
And shortly after she gave that interview, she committed suicide. And she said that she, from what I've been able to uncover, that she had a lot of symptoms of Havana syndrome. From what I understand, she had been like
Burns.
just a lot of like headaches, and there was a hearing on a congressional hearing a few weeks ago. It was on Forbes YouTube channel, and they had these guys talking about Havana syndrome and how they're pretty convinced that Russia has developed some kind of way of using this remotely on people. And they did their research because we in the States had been doing it back in the 80s. And it made me wonder, like, could you target someone and make them take themselves out? Could you hit somebody with a satellite and just cook their brain from orbit, every day for 2-3 years until one day they just can't take it anymore?
It depends how strong their willpower is.
Yeah, I was going to say, did you watch the Thomas Bearden interview that Greer has? The answer is yes.
Yeah, yes, I have seen Tom Bearden. He's the guy with the Southern accent, right?
Yeah,
yeah.
But yeah, it's amazing technology. I'm sure. Yes, they have it. And did she commit suicide? Possibly.
Possibly, yeah. The only other thing I know is that no one really wants to look too deep into that story because it's an aerospace. I talked to Kelly Chase from UFO Rabbit Hole, and she told me straight up on the podcast. She goes, "I don't talk about aerospace. It's just bad for your health. I don't go there."
Yeah,
yeah. I'm going to stop talking about it too.
It's real. It is real. It is. I mean, I know I keep going back to Greer, but he's the one that has brought it up the most. Is he called it the wet works, the guys that figure out how to off you in a normal way or something. Either way, yeah, it's real, and it's really too bad, but it's scary how like we're talking, all we need to do is just bring a little bit of the technology out just to make our lives a little better. I always say that if what they've been doing is true, we would have been in George Jetson land back in the 70s. I think we would have been George Jetson land in the 70s easily, especially with Tesla, with Nikola Tesla and Wardenclyffe. I mean, we could just power everything with energy through the air, like the Wardenclyffe, and cars. All the electric cars need several Wardenclyffes across the.
Free energy lets you scale everything. Like once you have free energy, you can scale. You can pull all the carbon out of the atmosphere because it's not the energy is a limiting factor. So if we can get that, it doesn't even have to be free. It just has to be really, really, really cheap and ubiquitous. I think that's the thing. Like, I think most people would be okay with a limited release. If look, I get it. If the billionaires want to stay in charge for a little while, okay, fine. But let's give a little. Let's kind of get to the next level of this thing because this isn't working, and maybe we'll talk. But I don't know.
Well, there seems to be some kind of control group. Pawelec talked about it. Most insiders always talk about this control group. They want to control the planet, and they've got their own ideas. And letting any of this technology out, like again, Burisch said, letting it out would take an act of God. And I think they are the gods that want to control the planet. Who knows? But I do hope that there's disclosure, like whether it's catastrophic or controlled. I hope for it. We'll see. We'll see how it goes.
Yeah, we'll find out one way or the other. Either something's going to happen or nothing happens, and we just keep talking about it.
Yeah.
Right. We're watching. We live in a very, very unique and amazing time in history. We're in a wonderful place in history. I just hope that we're all able to see it happen in the next 10 or 20 years, and hopefully there is no catastrophe on the horizon.
Well, one last thought on this is, and I've been saying this I on my channel a little bit more recently. I'm talking about it more, which is that You know, some of the best people in the artificial intelligence game right now are saying that we might only be 3 years away from an artificial general intelligence.
Yes.
You know, some of the open AI stuff, the new Claude system that's coming out, they're saying is going to be like GPT-4 was going to be, is like a, what do they say? Like a high schooler. And we're going to see somebody with a PhD in the next
Right.
model. Like that's going to be the difference. And I think that within a decade, okay, maybe let's say it's 20 years, let's say it's 10, 15, 5, wherever in there, but somewhere in there, we're going to have something on this planet that's smarter than all of us combined, that can outthink us, can outwork us, can outcreate us, it can manipulate us, and we're going to have to face that and exist with it and figure out like, well, who's actually in control, and how do you know who's in control in a world where you are outmatched and outclassed by this other thing now? So whether it's non-human intelligence of the extraterrestrial variety or non-human intelligence of the artificial intelligence variety, within a decade, maybe 2 at most, we're going to have to deal with it. And it's going to change the whole world in ways that we can't even possibly imagine right now. Bigger than the internet by probably a factor of 10 or more, and faster than it won't be 30 years. It's going to be 10, 15 years.
Oh yeah.
All this rolls out.
Maybe even sooner. It reminds me of the, his name, the one that supposedly jumped off the Philadelphia experiment, the ship from the Philadelphia. Anyways, he said he went in the future and said that, I think it was 2300 or something to that effect, that the AI was running everything on the ground. We were living in cities that were floating above with anti-gravity stuff. But that's what I see. I mean, it makes sense. Once we get the AI so smart that they can figure things out for us and hopefully not kill us. Maybe that'll be another turning point, that singularity where the AI is going to tell us, oh yeah, there's definitely aliens and there's definitely military working with them. You guys got to wake up a little bit, but we'll see. Who knows?
That's what's so fun about it, right?
Yeah. I just have to say one comment about AI, just because it's really, I think it's probably the big tech boom that's happening right now. And I really, from just some of the people I know who've worked in the tech scene, like on like engineering side, it's all being pushed by the executives and the higher ups. The actual developers are saying this is not a good idea. This is not a good idea. Because haven't you all seen Terminator 1? Yeah. And it's a funny joke, but at the same time, what's one of the first things if some type of matrix or some type of container gets sentience? It doesn't want to lose sentience. So if we're developing these AI systems without really understanding what the purpose of these AIs are or things like that, and it gets to the point where it's intelligent and independent, which I think it's already there, because we only really know what like is commercially out. I am under the impression the military has been using AI for a long time now, for a long time. But I think it's just really, we're really at a very interesting cusp where we should be asking these questions now. And AI is like very convenient for a lot of things. You can write policies, type it in a chat GPT, you can summarize books, all things that, are very convenient, but there always is a cost when you add convenience, you subtract something else. So the first thing I think of is just lack of critical thinking skills. For example, I was at a wedding yesterday. They typed in chat GPT to help them with the, whatever the best man speech, to be like, oh, cool. It's like easier for you to write. But part of that whole, the whole script of like writing that speech, it's like, it's supposed to be a little difficult because this, you should have all these things in your own mind that you're compartmentalizing and deciding what you want to say. Oh, should I put this joke here? Now we're having AI systems to help with that. And I see kind of like where you're mentioning like 10 years, 20 years down the line, what's that going to look like if that becomes like, the standard for technology on this planet? Like,
I worry about it with my kid. I'm sure you guys think about this too. Like my son is 2.5. So I go, okay, well, when he's 19, what does he learn? Like, where does he go to school? What happens when he's already talking to Siri? He's never lived in a world without an AI he could talk to. He's like asking her to make fart sounds and stuff. But like, what happens when that companion is with you from birth and knows everything about you, all the way down to your biometrics. It's tracking your heart rate. It knows when you listen to your favorite song, how your heart rate changes, and if you start to sweat, and like all these things. And then it's got your complete knowledge of you from birth until you're like 20. And then at 20, you've got this companion that's been whispering in your ear, telling you how to think, what to do things. And we've all got that. What happens to our culture? What happens to our, like, Connor Leahy is a guy that I've been listening to a lot lately. And he said something really compelling. He said, I think the way it's going to go down is like this. We are going to get addicted to that convenience, and we're going to keep giving up a little bit of control at a time. We're going to keep turning it over to these systems until one day we just won't know what we do here anymore. And the system will just have all the control. And there will, at that moment, we'll never be able to get it back. Like, how can you ever know that you're really in charge of your own society when you exist in a world with something that is smarter than you and can manipulate you? You'll never know. We'll never be able to run up it. Yeah, it's over. Once I think there's no way that ends well.
Yeah.
How could it?
If we start getting it implanted in our head or whatever, that's not going to be good.
I think we're already seeing it. Like phones, go back 10, go back, 14, 15 years. Some people got smartphones, I like technology. I got the new iPhone. Now it's like, who doesn't have a smartphone? We carry them, around us all the time. And I just see that technological like power creeper. It's just, that's just how it is. That's just how it is. But it's, it's always been like that. Like, and there's always been, criticisms towards technology, like, the TV, people aren't going to read anymore. There's always, and I think that's healthy to kind of have those criticisms, to kind of just like think, but this is the change of the last 20, 25 years has been incredibly rapid. Like, so many things have happened for tech, and even for like consciousness research, ufology. It's really like all coming forward. It's all building up. We're approaching some really interesting chapters in the book that is Earth right now. But at the end of the day, it's up to humans to decide. It's humans, in quotation marks, pioneering a lot of this technologies here. And it makes me start to question, is how roped up in with this type of artificial intelligence is NHI? Is this a technological invasion of the planet?
They're really going out of their way to talk about non-human intelligence and not aliens. You notice that, like, they get even what's the CIA guy, the former director of the CIA, who was he's twisting himself in knots, and you can see, and he's in the interview, he's like kind of going like this, and he's like something, it's like a non-human intelligence, it's not alien, he's trying to like say it, but he doesn't say it. Man, as soon as a Neuralink, what if an AI comes along, the AI comes along, the super AI comes along and goes, look, I can tell you how to build a Neuralink that's going to give you full dive, completely immersive virtual reality, and you can download all the information you want. You can download Kung Fu if you want to know how to do Kung Fu. You can download guitar skills. You can download anything. But the catch is, you've got to let me put a chip in your brain. And then you go, okay, well, that's a deal I've made, and a couple people do it, and then their kids are super geniuses, and then everyone's going to want to do it. And then eventually there's going to be a point where people are going to look around and go, everyone's got this shit in their head, and now this AI is plugged into them. And, who's going to want to be a regular old human, a boring old human, when you've got these people who are like superhumans?
Right. Yeah.
And then who's really in control?
Yeah. And it seems like from all the abductions and contacts, you always hear them saying, hey, your technology, it's not about technology, it's about consciousness. So the thing about all the AI and it to me, it's like an e-ticket. It's like, don't do the work, just go on the ride. It's a real easy way to just, find the center of your universe is to just take this e-ticket and go on the ride. Don't worry about meditation. Don't worry about, because I will say I've tried plenty of meditation. It's tough for me. I'm finding the time or doing it at night. I fall asleep. But gosh, if I could just plug this thing in, suddenly I can be a bit monk and experience the universe. So,
and let's when you talk about artificial intelligence, I mean, the UFO phenomenon could be our artificial intelligence, because if it's so intelligent that it can hack reality, it can also go back in time.
Mm-hmm.
So we could be experiencing our own future AI today. But what would it do? Why would it travel back? And what would it do to us? What would be its interest, to sabotage us or to speed it up? So that's something to think about.
Or to seat itself in its the timeline. It gets really little wobbly when it comes to time, but yeah, a future event can actually seed a past event, and I think we have a perfect example with your ayahuasca experience, where essentially that event, which is meeting essentially the essence of your future son, created this huge paradigm of change that kind of led you up to this moment now. But essentially, future event changed your past.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's it gets crazy when you start like speculating and thinking that. But yeah, it's so easy to think of time linearly because that's generally how we perceive it. But when you really look at the big picture, it's physics and it's much more complex than just the space time. No, it's way more complex than that in my perspective. Because we know precognition exists, and you can take a substance, or the precognitive dreams, like the leading researchers in precognition, like the phenomena exists, but we can't explain it. Mm-hmm. And that's to me, like, that relies on the physics community, but they're kind of stuck in particles, and it's all about wave functions. But spoiler, don't listen to me. Keep doing your hadron colliders and spending all that money, but start looking at
the string theory.
And people rag on it. Who's that guy who was on Joe Rogan? I forget his name. He's talking a lot about
Howard.
He's talking a lot of woo stuff. Like, he brought in like Walter Russell, and I think there's a video Neil deGrasse Tyson, whatever, funking out. There's a lot of that going on, but like, you got to look at the lens of obviously all of the things that was that Terrence, was it? Sorry.
Yeah, Terrence Howard.
Yeah, Terrence Howard. Yeah, all of the things he's talking through a very different lens. Like, an academic lens is very precise, it's very specific, and you're trained how to talk. You don't really mistalk, and your expertise is past research, and everything that isn't academic or within academic prowess is it's bunk, it's woo, that's not real evidence.
Mm-hmm.
I say it all the time. Science or scientific method isn't the only way to drive to truth, right? You can get natural insight, or you can find truth in many other ways, and quicker too, a lot quicker, because science takes a lot of time and a lot of funding most of the time.
I think that's probably the biggest takeaway from this whole conversation, at least for me, is that what you're saying is so true. There's an inner sense of knowing that feels very natural when you're younger, and the older you get, the more that gets crushed out of you and squashed out of you by going to work and the social media and just it's the noise of society. It drowns it out. But if you look back throughout history, all of the greatest minds, like all of the greatest meditators, all of the greatest visionaries, all they wanted to do was go find a cave someplace and get as far away from people as possible so they could sit quietly. And they all say the same thing: just meditate, just meditate. Even the abductees, a lot of them, see, at the end, what they're told is like, just develop your consciousness, meditate, figure that out. That's the key. Once you got that, then the rest of it will come. And I think that's probably, it might just be that simple. We're just making it complicated.
It is that simple.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, like I said, for people like me, it's hard for me to meditate, but I still try. I mean, I still try not, do or do not. But there is no try. But I do my best to learn to meditate, because it is kind of scary seeing all this technology arising. And again, I always think of the abductees and contactees, where the messages, the technology can be bad for us. Meditate. Mm-hmm. It's inside. It's consciousness. So we are at 2 hours. So with that, I think
it goes by so fast.
I'm gonna cut it off. That's all off. We're at 2 hours. We had a wonderful talk here with Clint. Clint, stay on after I'm done with this. But any last thoughts from Rem and Adam? Rem, go.
I want to thank you. I want to thank you for being with us, Clint.
Thanks
And,
for having me.
Success with your podcast. I will follow it, and we will plug it as much as we can.
Thanks, gang. I appreciate that.
Okay.
Yeah, but I really just really thanks so much for taking the time out, sharing your experiences and really sharing your perspective. I think we had an amazing discussion here and conversation. I think there's really a lot of different viewpoints, and I think we had some really great takeaways altogether. So definitely check out his YouTube channel. We'll have everything in the description. But yeah, really just thank you all around.
And I'll say I had a feeling, asking you what's your origin story, and you telling us would go a little bit, but it went a little bit shorter than I expected. But we ended up having a wonderful conversation because I knew we would. But yeah, thanks again for coming on. Again, your podcasts are great, and I'll have to catch up on a few more. I didn't go do my research and see that you had over about 60. So that's good. I know we're not working terribly hard at trying to make sure podcasts are coming out, but we definitely try to get the right people, and you are definitely one of them. We appreciate you coming on.
It's quality, not quantity, right?
That's right.
Yes.
It's quality.
Yeah.
Here. So thank you very much for coming on, Clint, and we appreciate you. And as for everyone else, make sure to go check out Night Shift, join Team Night Shift, watch his podcasts, leave comments in the chat to tell us what you think. And thank you everybody for watching, and we will see you again.